devotion and love, surrender to self-reservation from others who can and self, blindness that touches perfection, but cursed is like anything else.
Okay, Buongiorno back with you on a Sunday afternoon for a lecture that was supposed to take place on last Thursday afternoon. My apologies, life happens, and trying to get up on a video set up out of Mia Casa presented some logistical problems that I've been trying to work out. The last one went pretty well for Con 240, but as many of you probably already know, Tichenor has been officially sealed and sanitized for your protection. There's a big white band around it, like you find in the commode at the hotel, and harsh warnings about going in there. So I felt really comfortable doing those, but change of venue, and hopefully these will be sufficient. I kind of try to get the kinks out in terms of where I'm sitting and how to place the PowerPoints. So I don't want to tarry around, but I need to hit some bullet points that I think are important. The first one is I hope people are checking out the blog. Last night I felt the need. I've been watching a lot of different YouTube videos on the pandemic and looking at what some of the people whom I generally go to for the truth, for the red pill, for information, and not dumbing it down and not having an agenda, was looking for videos by those kind of people, the people that I've learned to trust and respect in academia and in as public intellectuals. So I would encourage you to check out that post. I write a little, and then there's some videos there by Richard Wolff, the economist, and also Yanis Varoufakis, the other well-known Greek intellectual and economist that was put into the public spotlight after Greece's financial woes due to the 2008 crash. There's an interview there with Chris Hedges, and it's all stuff that they're talking about. They're talking about Corona. They're talking about COVID-19, and they're talking about possible scenarios. And the last one is by Noam Chomsky, who really, if you know anything about anyone, doesn't really need an introduction. He's considered the most outstanding public intellectual in this country in the last 30 years as far as the left was concerned. And I suggest you look at them. I suggest you comment on them. And I suggest you don't, like I had said in the blog, I suggest you don't attempt to take them all in one sitting, because I do believe that the revelations that they, the things that they need to talk about, I don't think should be taken in one sitting. Not unlike Morpheus's revelations to Neo with the red pill. I just think it's a lot to take in at once. All right, but I felt that part of my mission statement and part of the mission statement and the motifs of all my classes is to cut through the BS and understand the ways in which mass media, driven by corporate interest, tends to twist things and split things and, put a little curtain up behind the little man at the mechanism, controlling the Wizard of Oz or Agent Smith, or they're all kind of they're all kind of variations on this. And we have to understand, although, certain, elected officials are stepping up and acting governorial, and acting, maybe, perhaps, acting presidential. I would say no. They too have an agenda, i.e., Governor Cuomo. Okay, it's like, cool, you're stepping up to this. What's the agenda, folks? What's the agenda? So I would strongly recommend taking a look at that and posting. That's for both classes. Because I don't know. I just did some soul searching and I realized that I'm doing some blogs besides the lectures, and I just was like, God, it's like I gotta get something out there, about this, and keep up to date with it, and keep you informed, and play that role, play the role of that I've always kind of played, and that professors should play in terms of letting their students know what's going on different fronts, irregardless of what your area of specialty is. I'm gonna dig into Sontag today, and I'm hoping we got a lot to go through today. We got a lot. Just kind of got halfway through Sontag, barely halfway through Sontag, but also need to deal with Andre Bazin, who was a famous French writer about photography and film, and also a more recent article by a guy by the name of Peter Benson talking about what changes when photos go digital. And once I have this up on the Bird and up on the blog, then I'll send out the midterm paper guidelines. That should be coming like within the next 2 days, all right? Midterm papers. I'll send it out via email as soon as this lecture gets published on the blog. The due date for the rough draft will be 2 weeks from then, whenever that is. If it comes out on Tuesday, it'll be 2 weeks. Whatever. We'll get to that. I don't want to like kick that to death right now. 5 to 7 pages typewritten, minimum of 5 pages. Typewritten, MLA format. I want 3 citations. 3 citations minimum. And you can cite, when you're doing citations, you don't have to necessarily do outside citations. Like if you're doing something on the matrix, there's going to be an option on the matrix, comparing the matrix again. There'll be a couple options on Benson, Berger, Sontag. There's about 5 different options. I'm also thinking about putting an option on there for Guy Debord's Society of the Spectacle, which I want to dig into ASAP. I think it's highly pertinent to our situation. I think it connects to Berger, and I want to dig into it soon. So more to come, more to be revealed on that. You should be getting into reading Society of the Spectacle. All right. I'm going to put a couple links on via email. That's available. That entire book is so well known that once again, like Berger, you'll find 3 or 4. You just Google Debord, Society of the Spectacle, PDF. You're going to get 8 of them. I'll shoot you some of the best ones. Read chapter 1. He writes in these things called, he writes in these little paragraph forms, which are called, the egghead term is aphorisms, little vignettes, all right? So there's 31 of them in the first chapter, so don't get crazy. It only runs about 5 or 6 pages, but it's very dense. It's very dense, and it needs to be unpacked slowly, and to define our terms. But I think that it will be very, very productive for us. So that's going to be for next week. I spoke to Douglas Lane, the publisher of Zero Books and the host of the podcast Zero Squared, we're going to move that talk back to the 14th. We're going to move it back a week. Because the way it was set up, it was like set up for the 7th, and there was just no way. And that, hopefully, I'll get you guys up to speed on that this week. That's probably going to be on Collaborate, so you're going to have to sign in during the actual class time on the 14th to interact with us when we do that. And hopefully I'll be able to get the tools up for the video part of Blackboard to record it so that we can also put it on the blog. Doug Lane, he's a really, really interesting guy. I'm sure he's going to have a lot of really great things to say about capitalism and our current pandemic and where we might or might not be going. And that's like going to be a mandatory attendance. You need to get up on that and log in, but don't go losing it. I will make sure that you have adequate instructions to log on and blah 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 onto that octopus tech, that matrix-like swimming metallic octopus of evil called Blackboard. I do believe it's evil. I do believe it comes from the depths of the underworld, but I think that we're just going to have to bite the bullet and submit to it. Going to get back to Sontag now. All right, start talking about Sontag. Journal's got to get his notes up and whatnot. Before I do that, though, I want to talk about. We kind of ended, Sontag's essay is basically about the different dimensions that photographs and the photographic enterprise and pictures, the roles that they play in our society, and the different ways in which society uses photos. And we talked about some of them already, but we talked about. Sontag talks a lot about this whole idea of how we take photos in a kind of acquisitive, kind of collectible kind of way, that there's this compulsion to attempt to gain control or grab fragments of the entire world. She had used the term, let's go to it really quick. She had used the term, finally, the most grandiose results of the photographic enterprise is to give us a sense that we can hold the whole world in our heads as an anthology of images. There's this, especially nowadays too, in the digital revolution with Instagram, people are just constantly taking pictures. And I responded to some of your comments about, and so we need to keep this ongoing dialogue. And I talked about, like, for instance, baseball cards, the collectability of those. And one thing she doesn't talk about, just a little anecdotal thing, she doesn't really talk about autographed photos of famous people, which I don't know if they hold the same weight nowadays. For a long, long time, it's like to get an autograph of a famous actor or a famous musician was a thing. It's like you go on eBay, you try to find, things by some of the more famous people, and they've been authenticated. And the whole idea of the autographed photo as being something to collect, a lot of well-known, a lot of times you're going to restaurants, Italian restaurants or whatever, and especially restaurants in the city, and a lot of places will just have these walls of photos of all these different, Howard Stern and blah, 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 and, Zsa Zsa Gabor and whoever, RuPaul. I'm thinking of some weirdos, all right? A friend of mine is what can we call him? He's a pack rat, he's a forager, he likes to go to a lot of different flea markets and antique stores. He likes to traffic in memorabilia and other things, and he just handed this to me the other day. He handed me two photos that he had found at an estate sale. I don't know if you can see them up close. One is a autographed photo of Henry Fonda. Henry Fonda, who was one of our premier American actors throughout the latter part of the 20th century, the star of Grapes of Wrath. It's obviously authentic, but the whole idea of the way in which the whole idea of authentication, and we're going to talk about indexicality today, and we've already talked about in Berger, we've talked about this idea of the copy versus the original, but the idea, I mean, take a reset, the idea that, you know, it was signed by him, he put his hand, that's his handwriting, you know. Some of you may want to do Buongiorno a favor and just kind of surf around a little bit on eBay to find out what, like, Henry Fonda, like, circa, probably around 1965 autograph photo will fetch. I think it's about $250, because if the proverbial poop hits the fan, it's like, I may need to start selling things. The other photo on the flip side, the other photo he gave me was from somebody you probably don't know. His name was E.G. Marshall. E.G. Marshall was a famous radio guy from back in the 40s and 50s, and I would listen to him growing up on a show called CBS Radio Mystery Theater. They still had, it was like what was left of old-time radio. During the 70s, like on WMBF or some of the AM channels, you could pick up this show. It was like a mystery anthology. They'd have a creaking door at the beginning, and it'd be like, I'm E.G. Marshall for CBS Radio Mystery Theater. So this whole idea taking possession, you know, with an autograph picture, I think the drive was always about, like, having a piece of the person, you know, like, you know, having an autograph was like having a piece of the celebrity, and that's what drove it, this idea that, you know, that person actually, I think it was Fred or somebody like that was talking about, you know, how we've become desensitized to take the photos, and how actual real photos tend to bear more weight, and even Sontag will say that they tend to, like, bear more weight. We don't dismiss them as easily as we do digital photographs. It's like, here's one of the last remaining pictures of someone who will remain nameless, namely moi, undergoing a form of torture that was known back then. There were different forms of child abuse back when I was coming up, that had not been outlawed yet. One of them was to take your child and dress them up in numerous get-ups that were rather uncomfortable, and then drag them to a photographer to have their picture taken. It's since been outlawed, not really, but there's been a lot of reform. Like, you're no longer, like, forced to, like, make your kid wear like knee socks and, like, knickers, and you're definitely not, and Buongiorno had to undergo this one time too. Buongiorno's parents, may they rest in peace, put him in a fucking sailor suit one time and marched his ass off to Olin Mills or wherever to take pictures. It's like, I'm still, like, in therapy over it, but what are you gonna do? It's like, you know, finally people woke up, you know, we got, CPS got wind of, like, that people were putting their kids in sailor suits, and they started, you know, coming in and intervening. So there was all of that going on. Let's check the time. Gotta get into this. Sorry for my butt. She says, recently photographed... Okay, this is where we kind of left off with Sontag. She said, recently photography, and remember she's writing in 1977, recently photography has become almost as widely practiced in amusement as sex and dancing, which means that, like every mass art form, photography is not practiced by most people as an art. It is mainly a social right, a defense against anxiety, and a tool of power. A photograph gives people an imaginary possession of a past that is unreal. They also help to take possession of space in which they are insecure. We were talking about that at the end of the last lecture. You know, the idea that, I mean, just looking at a photograph of myself at like 4, 5, 6 years old, it's hard to like kind of, there's like this disconnect between the fact that this is me. Obviously, this is a relic of an experience that I have absolutely no memory of whatsoever. You know, and personally, I'm glad I did it. But this idea of memory, this idea of the ways and Bazin is going to get into that. Bazin is going to get into that. Let's frame it up a little differently. By the way, the PowerPoints will be out on these, so don't worry if they're hard to see. The different ways that we use photos in society. The different psychological and political and journalistic functions of the ways in which we take photos are the things that she's attempting to cover. The first, she talks about the ways in which the ways in which they act, and this is not unlike Berger, the ways in which they act as in a kind of materialistic way, and we also talked about the ways in which they were a certification of they were used by the legal system as proof, as evidence that, and we need to talk about that. You know, how the verisimilitude of the photograph, how we have these preconceived ideas, these overarching ideas about the ways in which a photo depicts reality, all right, and how digital photography will be a game changer to the idea of reality, of the idea that this really happened. She says they're also a way of certifying experience. Taking photographs is also a way of refusing it. By limiting experience to a search for the photogenic, by converting an experience into an image, a souvenir. It's a way of certifying experience, but it's also a way of refusing it. You know, because when we're at places and if we're engaged in life, there's a big distinction between being at a place and being present to a situation, or being behind or experiencing the entire experience through a viewfinder. And I used to use the anecdote when I was working for broadcast news. I would go out to a lot of like events, and especially during the summer there would be, you know, like the Blueberry Festival in Montrose, or this festival, or the Speed, blah blah blah. And I would go in the capacity of just like working as a videographer, and you know, I would see the whole thing through a viewfinder. I'd go, I'd get my shots, I'd interview people, and I'd split. And I would come back to the edit bays, and I'd have a reporter or somebody come up to me and go, "Well, how was it?" It's like, you know, was it? It's like, and I used to half jokingly say, "I don't know, I wasn't there." You know, meaning I wasn't there, meaning that I really wasn't. I was there, but I was there with it framed through a viewfinder and a job, and that's the way I experienced it. I experienced it from one step removed. And I think that's what Sontag's attempting to say here about like the ways in which it certifies experience, but we refuse experience too. You know, the whole idea of like, I always like pose the question to people like, you know, you go, let's say you go on vacation, you go to France or Spain or whatever, and you go, and I once proposed to a student the idea of like, why not just go and just be there? Don't take any pictures, just be there wherever she or he was going, Just go and be there in the moment and experience it as such, as a transitory thing, and don't worry about taking photos. And this person was literally like, they kind of like, it was almost like, you know, I had told them to like go and kill somebody. They were just like, how dare it? It's like they were like somewhat offended by the prospect of like going on vacation without taking like pictures. Like, you know, what are you, crazy? You know? But there is this sense of like how we're just, and I think that this is an increasing phenomena, how we are kind of living our lives through screens, you know, and this distinction about like just being present in a situation, you know, and experiencing it through a picture, you know, that there's that marked distinction, you know, that they just don't correlate, you know. Sorry for the picture. I was being a little bit like bad. Let's see if I can't get some of these out. Ooh, F5, and then he's got to go through the whole thing. She talks about, this is a photo that she refers to. It's an ad for the Leica camera. And for the longest time, I did this lecture. I could not find this image, and then I ultimately ended up finding it. She says of this image, photography has become one of the principal devices for experiencing something, for giving an appearance of participation. One full-page ad shows a small group of people standing pressed together, peering out of the photograph, all but one looking stunned, excited, upset. The one who wears a different expression holds the camera to his eye. He seems self-possessed, is almost smiling, while the others are passively, clearly alarmed spectators. Having a camera has transformed one person into something active, a voyeur. Only he has mastered the situation. What do these people see? We don't know, and it doesn't matter. It's an event, something worth seeing, and therefore worth photographing. The ad copy, white letters across the dark lower third of the photograph, like news coming over a teletype machine, consists of just 6 words. Prague, Woodstock, Vietnam, Sapporo, Londonderry, Leica. Crushed hopes, youth antics, colonial wars, and winter sports are alike. All are equalized by the camera. Taking photographs has set up a chronic voyeuristic relationship to the world, which levels the meaning of all events. It levels the meaning of all events. It's an interesting idea, you know, and somebody was talking about that in the post in the blog. It's an interesting idea, but once again, we're back into this idea of the voyeur. Photography is essentially an act, and here we get into some of the ethical aspects of it, especially in regards to photojournalism and photojournalists at the time that she was writing were engaged in a lot of covering of a lot of foreign conflicts, especially the end of the Vietnam War. Photography is essentially an act of non-intervention. Part of the horror of such memorable coups of contemporary photojournalism as the pictures of a Vietnam bonds reaching for a gasoline can or of a Bengali guerrilla in the act of bayoneting a trussed-up collaborator comes from the awareness of how plausible it had become in situations where the photographer has the choice between a photograph and a life, to choose the photograph. The person who intervenes cannot record. The person who records cannot intervene, you know. And that is a really good friend of mine from down in New York did a documentary a few years ago about a famous French photojournalist by the name of Olivier Rebaud, and it was Ribot was one of the first journalists to be shot and killed in El Salvador, in the El Salvador coup of the Sandinistas. And he came up to the class and he showed the film, and he was talking about the situation of given a certain situation, for instance, the one she's talking about, and I don't have a copy of it here, is a very well-known photograph by Malcolm Brown of a Buddhist monk in, I believe, Laos, or actually in Vietnam during the Vietnam War. The Buddhist inhabitants of Vietnam were very against the war, being Buddhist, and there's a well-known picture of a Buddhist monk who, in protest of the war, pours gasoline over his head and sets himself on fire. And the question that needs to be asked is, when it comes to being in environments where people are being killed or people are being slaughtered, and you were given this dilemma of being able to save a life or being able to record it. What is more important? Because one could argue that this whole idea of non-intervention and this whole idea, and she'll talk more about this whole idea that we needed to, it's an ends versus the means kind of thing. If I don't get, it's I save one life, but if I get this photo into a major magazine and I can flip hearts and minds and change policy, I might be able to save thousands, or so the rationale goes. Whether it holds up or not is, hard to say. So there's that. And here are some pictures, just to exemplify this whole idea of how one of the photojournalistic goals and of photography we had talked about is being able to capture human suffering in order to raise awareness. The whole idea of raising awareness and where's the line cross between intervention and actually reaching out and helping a person and taking a picture of it. She also wants to talk a lot about the idea of taking pictures having a kind of phallic, masculine kind of intervention. There's always this idea of an intervention. There's always this idea, and she talks about the sexual voyeuristic connotations of taking pictures. We talked all about that with Berger, the male gaze, and she'll talk a lot about this kind of voyeuristic. She'll even liken it in a way to rape, that in a way we kind of. She says about this, there is a much strong. She talks about the whole idea of voyeurism and sexual fantasy, and this kind of plays into the whole idea of porn and pornographic magazines and pornographic films, how they're kind of an exploitation, and this gets all hashed out with Berger in chapter 2 of Ways of Seeing, the depiction of the female. But she says the camera, she doesn't go as far as saying that the camera actually rapes. This is another still from a well-known film that she refers to, very famous cult film from the 60s called Blow Up. She says if professional photographers often have sexual fantasies when they're behind the camera, perhaps the perversion lies in the fact that these fantasies are plausible and so inappropriate. In Blow Up, 1966, Michelangelo Antonioni, the famous French filmmaker, has a fashion photographer hovering convulsively over Verushka's body with his camera clicking. Naughtiness indeed. In fact, using a camera is not a very good. In fact, she says, using a camera is not a very good way of getting at someone sexually. Between the photographer and subject, there has to be distance. She goes, the camera doesn't rape or even possess, though it may presume, intrude, trespass, distort, exploit, and at the farthest reach of metaphor, assassinate. All activities that, unlike the sexual push and shove, can be conducted from a distance and with some detachment. So there's this whole idea, and this whole like kind of fetishistic idea that really fuels pornography about being a voyeur. Being on the outside. There's always these fantasies of the voyeur that come into play with the ways in which the sexuality is like played out. Next photo. No, that's not the one. She says about this film. This is a film from 1960 called Peeping Tom, and she references this too. There's a much stronger sexual fantasy, however, in Michael Powers' extraordinary movie Peeping Tom, which is not about a peeping Tom, but about a psychopath who kills women with a weapon concealed in his camera while photographing them. Not once does he touch this subject. He doesn't desire their bodies. He wants their presence in the form of filmed images, those showing them experiencing their own death, which he screens at home for his solitary pleasure. The movie assumes connections between impotence and aggression, professionalized looking and cruelty, which point to the central fantasy connected with the camera. The camera is a phallus, at most, a flimsy variant. The camera as phallus, rather, is, at most, a flimsy variant of the inescapable metaphor that everyone unselfconsciously employs. However hazy our awareness of this fantasy, it is named without subtlety whenever we talk about loading and aiming a camera, about shooting a film. So she also likens the idea of the camera to an instrument as being an instrument of violence. That there is these kind of allusions to the camera being, and she'll talk about, for instance, like people trading, like going on safaris and shooting like, endangered species with the like people, that had an environmental conscious kind of put down their muskets and picked up a photo. It's like picked up a camera and instead of like literally shooting animals, they would go and take pictures of them. The whole idea of whale watching and going and nature photography and all the allure of like National Geographic and nature, but once again, there is this kind of metaphoric connection that she makes with photography as being, not just an act of acquisition, but a kind of act of violence that she'll continue to play with and then blow up. Then she wants to start talking about photographing atrocities. She says, a photograph that brings news of some unsuspected zone of misery cannot make a dent in public opinion unless there is an appropriate content of feeling and attitude. The photographs Matthew Brady and his colleagues took of the horrors of the battlefields. Remember, Matthew Brady was a famous Civil War photographer. She says the photos that he took of the battlefields did not make people any less keen to go on with the Civil War. The photographs of ill-clad skeletal prisoners held at Andersonville inflamed Northern public opinion against the South. The effect of the Andersonville photographs must have been partly due to the very novelty at the time. The political understanding that many Americans came to in the 1960s would allow them, looking at the photographs Dorothea Lange took of Nisi on the West Coast being transported to internment camps in 1942. And you got to remember what she's referring to is the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II due to more often than not paranoid fears that they would be collaborators or spies. And hundreds, if not thousands, of Japanese. There's a few movies on it. She's talking about that, but she's saying that, you know, different wars and different like photographs will have different people will have reactions to war photos, in different contexts with different wars, depending on whether the ground for dissent is strong enough for those photographs to have any kind of activist impact. You know, it's like, and she'll go as far as saying that, you know, you need to have the context. You know, it's like she'll say like, and it wasn't even there with the Korean War yet, because the people were so strongly behind it ideologically, due to the propaganda that had been given to them about this fight against the communists. But then will come Vietnam. Then will come the Vietnam War, and the role of photojournalism in a war which was heavily protested, and a huge demographic that protested the war, protested the draft. One of our first really American foreign conflicts, in which there was this huge demographic of dissent and draft dodgers and people that just felt, you know, we're also talking about, you know, a period of social unrest with civil rights and the women's movement, but that war was a very, very unpopular war for a lot of people, especially those that got drafted and resisted the draft. And she will go as far as saying that, you know, there we have a context where those photos, you know, there needs to be, photos will only activate hearts and minds to resist certain kinds of events, or certain, if there is an overlying like political atmosphere or environment for that feeling of dissent to take root. She'll also talk about the ways in which we've become, it's like obvious that there is also this phenomena of the fact that we have become desensitized to photos, that we've seen so many photos of so many horrors under so many different circumstances, that there is also this underlying sense of desensitization about the whole thing, you know. It's a very famous photo, one of the most famous photos in history, of the girl that was sprayed with napalm during the Vietnam War conflict. And she will reference this. She'll reference this photo as being, you know, she'll reference this photo as being instrumental in changing hearts and minds about the nature of like the ways that women and children were being massacred, you know. And it just, you know, once again, like photographs can, you know, change the sentiments of an entire nation. We'll see that time and time again, you know, from everything from, like, you know, in modern times, the picture of Tank Man during the Tiananmen Square massacre, or in the Arab Spring, the man setting himself on fire. She says, the quality of feeling, including moral outrage, that people can muster in response to photographs of the oppressed, the exploited, the starving, and the massacred also depends on the degree of their familiarity with the images. Don McCullen's photographs of emaciated Biafrans in the early 1970s had less impact for some people than Werner Bischoff's photographs of Indian famine victims in the early 50s, because those images had become banal, and the photographs of Tuareg families dying of starvation in the sub-Sahara that appeared in magazines everywhere in 1973 must have seemed to many like an unbearable replay of new familiar atrocity exhibitions. Photographs shock, and so insofar as they show something novel. Unfortunately, the ante keeps getting raised, partly through the very proliferation of such images of horror. One's first encounter with the photographic inventory of ultimate horror is a kind of revelation, that prototypically modern revelation, a negative epiphany. For me, she goes on to say, for her, the real game changer when she was 14 years old was seeing, for the first time, I think she said it took place in around the late 40s, 45, 47, when she first sees the pictures that come back from the concentration camps in Auschwitz and how they would leave this indelible, emotional mark on her that she would never quite be the same after seeing these, We talk a lot about that in the other class, the ways in which the rhetoric of an image, the ways that certain images will be a game changer in the way that we see the world or that we see humanity, both pro and con. This is an image of children from Afghanistan after the Afghan War, displaced, standing in a bomb crater, and I think that we can make a case with this particular photo, with these photos that came out of the Afghan conflict, that we were so hyped up. It's like they couldn't really compete with the images that sent us there in the first place, which were the most spectacular images of catastrophe that had ever been captured up to that point, which were the real time, the video and the photos of the jetliners striking the World Trade Center. I think that Sontag, if we could speculate on how she would feel about these images, I think she would say the same thing. It's like our pro-war fervor was so strong that these photos had very little effect in changing hearts and minds. It's like photos that are taken for social political means or for social or political activism or to make people aware of certain things that are going on in certain parts of the world. I think she's attempting to say always have to have a kind of set and setting, right? She'll go as far as saying that it's like you can't really stop a war with all these pictures unless there's already some kind of sentiment there that something's a little bit not right. There's already got to be a kind of underlying kind of shared structure of feeling with the general public to make those images powerful, to make those images actually to make that particular bullet find its target. You need the right situation, for that to happen, and she says that it's not always there. I'm going to end her with this. Photography implies that we know about the world if we accept it as the camera records it. But this is the opposite of understanding, which starts from not accepting the world as it looks. All possibility of understanding is rooted in the ability to say no. Strictly speaking, one never understands anything from a photograph. Let me repeat that. Photography implies that we know about the world if we accept it as the camera records it. But this is the opposite, she'll say, of understanding. She'll say the photo is not understanding in any kind of real sense, is what she's attempting to say. What does she mean? But this, let me just go on and finish it. But this is the opposite of understanding, which starts from not accepting the world as it looks. All possibility of understanding is rooted in the ability to say no. Strictly speaking, one never understands anything from a photo. What's she attempting to say? She makes an allusion to something that Bertolt Brecht said about the crop. It's like, let me give you an example. All right, it's like I get a picture of people leaving a factory. All right, or I get people working on an assembly line, or I get pictures of people at an airport. It's like all it is a photo. It doesn't really. It barely scratches the surface of all the different forces involved. Let's take, for instance, pictures of people in a factory. I see pictures. It's like, let's say I just have absolutely no knowledge of industrialization or a factory or whatever. It's like all I have is a picture. I don't have all the knowledge required to understand mass production and industrialization and unfair work conditions and the way that a factory operates and the way that this system of capitalism operates in terms of trade. It's like all I got is a picture. A picture never gives me all, even like pictures of wars. I get a picture of, for instance, a situation in Syria. It tells me absolutely nothing about all the geopolitical forces or peace treaties or different infighting, or racism or genocide or the history of it. It doesn't really give me the history of it. All it gives me is a photo. So I believe that that's what she's attempting to say when she says that a photo is, well, just a photo. It gives us a limited amount of data that seems like, remember, from the beginning of the article, a feeling of that seems like knowledge and therefore seems like power. But really, in many ways, photography is a way of attempting to kind of skim off of the living true forces, that often can only be gained intellectually, by reading about them, by reading about the ways in which a certain war operated, or by reading about the ways a certain process operates. That therein lies understanding. The understanding, more often than not, comes from a kind of abstract assimilation of an entire process in connection to other processes and history, and that pictures sometimes blind us to that. They blind us to that knowledge. They give us a certain kind of feeling, but that ultimately, knowledge comes from other venues. So that there's all that going on with Sontag, and there's a lot more. She's writing in 1977, and she's writing as a woman. She's writing as a Marxist. She's writing as a feminist. And we have to take all that into account. But the things that she has to say, I think, are very, very cogent. And I also think that, once again, it's like, even though she's writing in 1977, I think we can take a lot of what she has to say about this explosion and proliferation of photos and what they serve, the social and psychological aspects that they play in our lives, and apply them to Instagram and Facebook, and how it's, essentially one can make a case that we're more inundated with photos and taking photos and selfies than ever. That it just got more prevalent. Everything that she says, and all the things that she says about desensitization too, that we have become desensitized by a lot of things. So let's get into Andre Bazin. Andre Bazin is going to say he's going to have a different take on photos, all right? He comes out, he's a French guy. Once again, we got the French guys. Comes out during a period in France, during both before and during World War II. He is a intellectual. He's writing about. He's a journalist. He's not really an academic. He's writing about the arts. And his writings would become not only his writing about photography, but his writing about films. His most well-known books are these two volumes on what is cinema. He wants to analyze film theory and cinema, and at that time in France, it's a very, very fertile time because this whole from like late 40s to like late 50s, the French are getting all over the intellectual potential and artistic potential of the cinema as a kind of renaissance, and we will end up calling it the French New Wave. And it will involve filmmakers like Jean-Luc Godard and Francois Truffaut and Eric Rohmer and Claude Chabrol, and there will be some women too, but there'll be it will be like a kind of intellectual film movement to really start to think about the nature of the political applications of film and it will be very cerebral in a lot of ways, although a lot of really accessible films come out of that period. You know, like Jules and Jim is one you should see, Francois Truffaut. Anything by Truffaut or Godard is worth seeing. Definitely worth seeing, especially if you have any aspirations to teaching about film or making films. You know, it's like Breathless by Godard is one of those films. But Bazin kind of acted like a mentor. He was a little bit older. He died very young, by the way, too, tragically. But he wasn't actually a filmmaker as such. Some of them, like Godard, a lot of them were writing about film and this like in this magazine called the Cahiers du Cinéma that has become like this valorized as this, you know, this Valhalla for like film theory. But he himself will not be a filmmaker, but he'll theorize a lot about photography and film, and he'll have a far different take than Sontag. He's writing about 3 decades earlier, mind you, all right? And he wants to talk, he's going to want to talk about what will become known as, let me get to it. He'll want to talk about what will become known as this idea of indexicality, all right? It's a $5 word. What does it mean? Let me kind of like explain it a little bit. Indexicality is merely this. You can look at something, for instance, in terms of its indexicality like this. Think of, for instance, think of an index. Think about like the old card catalogs. You'd go into the library and you would go through the card catalog and you would find index cards. An index, for something to be an index of something, it needs to be directly related. It depends on the degree. How indexical something is depends on the degree of how related it is to its subject or the thing that it's representing and how strong that connection is. All right? The argument will go like this, all right? So let me give you another example. For instance, what's an index? Let's say that it's a snowy day and I come home and I'm coming up my stairs and I see footprints going up to my door and then going away, like somebody. It's like, you know, it's like obviously, you know, it's like I would be like, someone's been here, you know, someone stopped by, and the footprint itself is an index of that person's presence. It's an impression that that person physically made on the ground in the snow. They left a trace. In a sense, an index is kind of like leaving a trace of yourself, or leaving a trace of, and this whole idea of leaving a trace of some type of like physical substrate, all right, will be instrumental in what he has to say about the truth value of photography, all right, as opposed to painting, first of all, and as opposed to other art forms, because, you know, one of Bazin's basic arguments is that You know, for most of human history, during most of the time that Berger covers with Western oil painting, and even before that, during the medieval period, and this entire period of trying to capture reality, all right, it's always about an interpretation to the degree that, for instance, to say I have an easel in front of me, I've got my subject. You know, as good as I am, as much of a virtuoso as Rembrandt or Rubens or Da Vinci was in capturing this photorealistic image, there's always my hand. There's always the image going to my mind, and me having to interpret the image with my hand and with whatever skills I have and with pigment. You know, Bazin will say that photography is an animal of an entirely different nature, because once and for all, we have this photographic instrument, this mechanical eye, this way of registering light and giving us an extract of that light that involves no human intervention. I can set a camera up wherever I want, and if I have like a remote control, you know, there needs to be absolutely no intervention on the part of the person. And this is the idea of indexicality, right? And when it comes to, and the argument that he's going to make in the ontology of the photographic film has to do with the idea that he's totally sold in the 1940s. Bazin is thoroughly sold on the idea that photographs are the final victory over capturing reality, all right? But before he does that, he'll go back and talk about the origins of representation, the origins of having something stand in for something else. And the first thing he wants to talk, he wants to pose the question, like, where did this thing come from? Why do humans have this need, this unerring need that never seems to go away, of just not taking reality at face value, but needing to have a copy of it, needing to have an extract of it, needing to have some kind of representation of that thing? Where does that instinct come from? And he'll go back historically, and we've talked a lot about this, and in the other class, he'll go back to the whole idea of the origins, the religious and the magic origins of building. And we talked about this, you know, the whole hunt and the bison with the arrow through it, and the wish fulfillment. The whole idea that by representing it, so I make it true. You know, this connection between this kind of magical link that will later become, in the secular world, will become delinked through secular humanism and the Renaissance. But he'll say that photography is kind of like embalming. It's kind of like making a mummy. It's kind of like trying to stave off when we take a photo. And during the Middle Kingdom and Late Kingdom of the Egyptian dynasties, you know, people were preserved. You know, they were really, you know, overly concerned about what was going to happen with this body. The body had to be, due to their whole religious pantheon and religious beliefs, this whole idea that the body had to be preserved in order for the person to be able to get to the other world, get to the underworld, so that pharaohs and people of means, and, you know, not everybody got mummified, you know, but this whole idea of mummification, and he'll talk about that, you know, as being that, you know, one of the motivating dynamics of, he'll go as far as saying, let's see if we got it here, he'll go as far as saying that we kind of have a what he'll call we have a kind of mummy complex. You know, other forms of insurance were therefore, it's like it was natural to keep up appearances in the face of the reality of the death by preserving flesh and bone. The first Egyptian statues then was a mummy, tanned and petrified in sodium, but pyramids and labyrinthine corridors offered no certain guarantee against ultimate pillage, right? So other forms of insurance, he says, were sought. So near the sarcophagus, there would be corn to feed the dead, terracotta statuettes, substitute mummies which might replace the body if the body was destroyed, right? And he'll go as far as saying, like, for instance, like, you know, historically, this kind of impulse in us to want to fight death, you know, to want to somehow remain immortal, will continue to play itself out. He uses the example, Louis XIV did not have himself embalmed. He was content to survive in his portrait by Lebrun. Civilization cannot, however, entirely cast out the bogey of time. It can only sublimate or concern with it to the level of rational thinking. No one believes any longer in the ontological identity of model and image. No one any longer believes in the ontological identity between model and image, all right? Got to talk about ontology really first, because it's in the title. I mean, it is in the title. What is ontology? What is he talking about? What's the definition of ontology? Well, Jordan will find it. What is ontology? It's a 5-letter word, all right? But basically, ontology is a branch of philosophy that comes about. It's really about, and they get very, very heavy about it. Ontologists, one of the famous ontologists, and the Germans are really good at this, all right? And it comes after this whole period of what is called German idealism, all right? And it kind of starts with the French with Descartes, but the Germans will just kind of run, especially a guy by the name of Immanuel Kant, will run with this idea of idealism. And ontology is kind of a response to idealism. And all idealism wanted to say was that, not unlike the Matrix, that reality as such, whatever is going on out there, in the real, whatever this chair here is, I can feel it, I can touch it, but I have no assurance whatsoever that what I'm touching or what is out there is real. The only thing that I ever really experience are the impressions that I'm getting, the ideal of it. Even when I touch it, you know, this whole idea of neurophysiology, of certain impulse, and this falls in with the Matrix again. You know, it's like they think that they're grabbing stuff. You know, it's like, remember, like Cypher thinks he's eating, you know, a piece of steak, but he's like, I know I'm not. You know, idealism will get off the ground and run based on that premise, and it will haunt philosophy for centuries. It will haunt this whole idea that Kant, we can never know reality, we can only know our impressions of it, how our mind decodes it. You know, that what's out there is like no man's land. We don't know. We can never know, right? All I can know is the ideas and the impressions and the phenomena and the appearances that play out in my brain and activate my hands and all that. Ontology, on the other hand, is doing something different. It's the study of being. It's the study of what it is for something to exist as opposed to not exist. What are the dynamics? And it's very metaphysical. It's like, what is existence? What is it to be anything? What is it to be a chair? What is it to be a human being? You know, and Heidegger will go as far as posing the question, why do we live in a universe of things? Why not just nothing? Why have things at all? Why wasn't the universe satisfied just to be some empty abyss? You know, it's like, so there's this, it's concerned with the study of being and of the different kinds of beings being that entities might have. So to discuss the ontological status, of a photograph or photography is to consider what kind of thing it is. And this is what Bazin is trying to get to, and later on in the Benson article, he'll go back and he'll rehash Bazin and a couple other famous philosophers who were trying to deal with. It's like if a photograph is a thing among things, what is it? What kind of thing is it really? And this is what Bazin is trying to get to. This is the realm that it exists in. All right, it's not a thing as much as it is this kind of physical substrate of a thing. When I look, especially during his period, we're not in digital yet. When I look at a photograph, even a photograph like this, or a photograph like this one, even when it's a reproduction, there's still always this kind of feeling, this kind of essential feeling that at some point the light that existed in that room where I was struck that print, and that this is a kind of record, that this is like has a physical connection. Remember, all we're getting is light in interacting with a chemical substrate, but that the light that existed in that room, the physicality and photonic ontology of that light, is somehow he'll talk about it like as a kind of like decal, like it's a graft of reality, that we kind of graft the light that's there and we preserve it, so that the idea of indexicality has to do with something is more indexical if it's like if it's like actually left a physical trace. And that's why he is so sold on the idea of I don't even know if you saw that. That's why he's so sold on the idea of photography being more indexical. I'm still having problems with the wide lens, blah blah blah, when I'm doing certain things. Sorry, trying to get the kinks out, trying to keep my hand on the rudder, brothers and sisters, as we move through uncharted territory and trying to get the information out there to you that you're going to need in order to do the midterm. This is a famous example that he brings up called the Shroud of Turin, that for the longest time among Christians, among the Christian faith, was considered this precious artifact due to the fact that, and you can't even say it was a shroud, it was this tattered shroud that somehow ended up in Turin, Italy during the Middle Ages, and the only way, I don't know the chain of events of how they actually found the image, but the image actually is a negative image that you can't see on the shroud unless the shroud is X-rayed. And then you can see this impression that was left in the shroud. And for a very, very long period of time, people felt that it was the shroud that Jesus Christ was wrapped in after the crucifixion. And it was held in such high reverence due to the fact that people literally believed that it had touched Christ. It had taken part in. There was an extract of his physiological being, of his flesh, extract on that thing, that it took part in his physicality, or there was all these other highfalutin ideas about this burst of energy when he died or when he was resurrected that left this thing. And it's still kind of mysterious because nobody knows. I mean, it's like some people consider it one of the first photos. But Bazin will bring it up to explain this whole idea of transference, this whole idea of how an image, the indexical, what the status of a photo is, as opposed to what the status of a painting painting is as being a record of something that happened, right? And that in Bazin's time in the 1940s, we don't have digital yet. You know, he is fully sold. You know, in ways that Sontag, writing in 1977, will not be. And let's end with this. A very faithful drawing may actually tell us more about the model, but despite the promptings of our critical intelligence, it will never have the irrational power of the photograph to bear away our faith. The photographic image is the object itself, the object freed from the conditions of time and space that govern it. No matter how fuzzy, distorted, or discolored, no matter how lacking in documentary value the image may be, it shares by virtue of the very process of its becoming the being of the model of which it is the reproduction. It is the model. What's he trying to say? He'll say that what he's trying to say here is that, you know, and the photographic images, and we saw this in early photography with like the Niepce photos and all that. It was kind of shitty. You know, it was kind of blurry. You couldn't really make out stuff. You know, it's like, as opposed to the photorealistic beauty of, you know, Da Vinci's, you know, Girl with Ermine or whatever. That's like just so vivid and stuff like that. But he says, notwithstanding that, he says that even like the blurry photograph is far more of a model of the real than the most virtuoso painting, right? Because it's one step removed. So this whole idea of this whole realist, you know, that Bazin in terms of photography is one of these staunch realists that it is, and we'll talk more about that. And we'll talk about the ways in which he differs with Bazin and with Sontag, and we'll wrap this up next time, I promise. Sorry, it's just a lot of material to cover. It's like, you know, I do want you to like get into board. We do have to start. If I have to add some extra lectures so we can get in on this, I will. We'll get the midterm guidelines out to you as soon as this goes up on the Bird. I hope you're well. I hope you're staying safe. I know that's a cliche. Please look at the Please look at the blog. Please read. Please watch some of those videos. Take notes. Discuss. Plan. All right? Because this thing, what's going on right now, is a huge question mark in terms of the ways that we're going to go back to normal or not. Because the whole idea of what normal is, the whole idea of going back to the way things were is still in question. Sorry. Gotta say it. All right? Love you. Hugs and kisses. We'll see you